If you're rated under 1400, make sure you know these endgame situations that we're going to cover today. I've got 5 different endgame situations. These come from the book Silman's Complete Endgame Course, Part 3, which we will finish today. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So situation number 1 is what's called fox in the chicken coop. Now, this is what Silman, used to describe the situation, but it's essentially a situation where you've got some pawns on one side of the board that are locked up, and then you've got one player has an extra pawn on the other side of the board. So in this case, white's going forward. And this is 99% of the time going to be a win for the side with the pawn if you follow this technique. He calls it fox in the chicken coop. Essentially, your king, the winning side's king is the fox. He's going to hunt down these chickens. And the way you do that is by simply pushing your pawn forward. And at the right moment, you abandon it when black's king is stuck guarding it, right? Because if black's king ever tries to come over here and take these, you just say, thank you very much, I'm just going to get a queen, right? That's not an option for black, right? If you go here and you do this, I'm okay, sure, you go ahead, I'm going to get a queen, I'm going to win the game, right? So black goes back, you go up, they move, you go here, you go here. Now, if you remember from the previous lesson, this endgame, if these are the only pieces on the board, this would be a draw, right? There's no way to force a win. The best case scenario would be a stalemate. But because there's other pawns, it changes everything, right? And so at the right moment, right here is the right moment. You've got him backed up against the wall. He's going to have to spend some time to come over here and take this. That's when you leave. Fox in the chicken coop, you go hunt the pawns, and you win the game. Now, in this case, there's multiple pawns, so you're pretty happy to take multiple pawns. But even if there was only one pawn, you could still win. Imagine that these guys, for a second, were not even here. I don't even have to worry about them. I can just box this king out, let's just say here, as I escort this pawn. It doesn't even matter that these pawns are here. His king can't come through. I push, I get a queen, and I win, regardless of if these were here or not, right? You could do the same thing. So, fox in the chicken coop, very, very basic and straightforward, process to follow, but this is a very common situation in chess where one player has one extra pawn. There's a couple of other pawns on the other side of the board. And even if you're in a middle game and you're thinking like, okay, should I trade these pieces off and go into a king and pawn ending? Make sure you think about this, because if you're playing as white and you have the extra pawn, absolutely, you should do it. You know it's going to be a win. If you're playing as black, you know this is going to be a loss, so don't do it, right? Say, nope, I can't go into that endgame. I have to figure out something else, all right? That's situation number 1. All right, let's jump to this position. And I realize there are no kings on the board, but we're going to talk about what Silman calls the deep freeze. And basically it's just when one pawn stops 2 pawns, okay? Or multiple pawns. Could be 3 in some rare cases. But basically in this position, let's say it's white's turn and white moves his pawn forward. This pawn is now shutting down both of these pawns at the exact same time. How is that possible? Well, this pawn can't move. And if this pawn moves 1, you just take it and you get a queen. Thank you very much. And if the pawn moves 2, this is the special move in chess called en passant. You capture like this and this pawn disappears. That's called en passant. And because en passant exists, this pawn is also stuck. They're just stuck, right? One pawn is stopping 2. Now black can go here and do the exact same thing to white. And if you try to move, they take you and they're going to get a queen. And if you don't, well, you're stuck, right? So in this case, both sets of pawns are stuck by the other side's pawns. Okay, that's really important. Now, let's take a look at a practical example of that. I'm going to go to this position right here. So it's white to play. White's pawns are going forward. And this position should be a draw. Okay, both players have 2 pawns. But it's a little bit interesting because this pawn is over here. And you might think, wait a second, fox in the chicken coop, doesn't that apply here where black can maybe abandon the pawn, go after these? The answer is no, it does not, as long as white doesn't make a mistake. So I want to let you pause and try to figure this out yourself. What move should white play in this position? All right, if you had a chance to think about that, the move is h4. This is the move you have to play. And because of what I just showed you, you should be able to see that g4, wait a second, now I'm allowing my pawns to deep freeze. They're stuck, right? I can't move them anymore. Why is this bad for me? Because now we will have a situation of the fox in the chicken coop where this king is going to, at the right moment, abandon this pawn. As an example, well, you can't do that. Let's say you move your king. He goes here. He pushes. You can't leave. You have to guard this. Okay? You have to go back. Okay? Okay? You have to go back. Okay? Right now, black says, all right, now's the moment. I'm going to go. Go ahead. Take my pawn. I'm going to go. I'm going to take this. I'm going to take, oops, sorry. I'm going to take this and I'm going to win. Okay? So, that's the idea. Now, I want to actually show you something else. Going all the way back here. We made a mistake. Black plays here. Can't we go h4 and just do a trade? So I push, he pushes, I push, he pushes, I push, he pushes, I push. It's just a queen for queen. Isn't this good enough? The answer is yes. If you got this position, this would be a draw. But there's a problem. Black's not going to do that. So what is black going to do when you play h4? Well, the answer is he's going to take you. But when you start pushing your pawn, he's going to pause just for a moment because this pawn's not going to go anywhere. And he's going to make sure he stops you. He's going to bring his king over. And he's going to stop your pawn first. And now he's going to get the queen. And there's nothing you can do, right? He just gets the queen and black's going to win. Okay, so it is a win for black if you mess that up. Now, going back to the original position, instead of blundering with g4, if you played the correct move with h4, the king moves. I mean, what is black going to do? He has to try to come for these pawns. There's nothing else really to do. You're going to push. He comes over. You're going to push. And now black has to take you. If they play here, which we'll come back to in just a second, it's going to be a losing move. So they have to take you. And we end up with what's just a draw. He comes over, you take him, he takes you, it's a draw. Okay, king against king. That's what should happen. Now, like I just said, there is a way for black to mess this up. Maybe, for whatever reason, black is like, you know what? I don't want to trade. I'm going to try to keep my pawn alive and sneak in here and take this and get a queen. That doesn't work because after you take, if he tries to sneak in, guess what? You get a queen. You're going to get a queen much faster than this guy. And this is going to be a win for white. Okay, so let's say at this point, black's like, that was a mistake. I realized what I did wrong. Let me go here and stop this pawn. How do you win as white? This is kind of a bonus lesson. This was not covered in the book, but this is just a bonus lesson I'm giving you guys. All right, well, the answer is very simple. You bring your king over, and you're going to, at some point, create what's called Zugzwang, where you attack the pawn. Black has to defend, right? Otherwise, you're just going to take and have two pawns, which is going to be a win. He defends, and now you create the Zugzwang. It's a situation where black would be okay. If black could just pass, they don't, I don't want to move. I'm just going to leave my pieces like this. You can move as many times as you want. I'm just going to sit here. They would be fine. We wouldn't be able to move any of our pawns. We wouldn't be able to take anything, and it would be a draw. But you can't pass in chess. So because of that, black is forced to make a bad move. This is what's called Zugzwang. White takes it, and now this is going to be a win. Let me just show you. You could push the pawn. You could push the pawn. You push the pawn. And how would you win this position? What do you guys think? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, there's multiple ways to do it. I think what I would probably do is start bringing my king around, for example. Bring my king around. And then at the right moment, I would figure out, okay, which pawn do I need to push in order to win the game? And I would push the g7 pawn. Because what I'm noticing is that it forces the king to run here. And then I sneak up, I abandon this guy, and I get the queen. All right, that would be how you would win. Okay, so I know we looked at a lot. The moral of this story, it's a very simple example, but don't let your pawns get blockaded like this. Okay, that's the moral of the story. We talked about a bunch of other extra bonus things there, but just don't let your pawns get blockaded. All right, let's go to the next example. Now, this situation number 3, is a bishop against a pawn. Okay, now, the pawn is the only piece that has chances to really win. Okay, because if it becomes a queen, you're going to win. If not, it's just going to be a draw. Remember, you can't just checkmate with just a bishop. So even if you were able to somehow manage to capture this pawn, you can't win with just a bishop. This is really super basic. If your bishop can control the pawn square, you just put it there, and then whenever it eventually moves, you just sacrifice, and it's a draw. Like, it's literally that simple. Okay, if you don't do that, you're going to lose. For example, you play something like this, you're going to lose now because you're too late. Black's going to win. We already covered this endgame, and that's pretty much it. Bishops against a pawn, super simple, not a whole lot to talk about. Let's move on. Situation number 4, this is the tricky one, okay? A knight against a pawn, okay? This is the one that you need to pay attention to. So, here's the general rule. If you can get your knight in front of the pawn, or at least where it's controlling a square in front of the pawn, you're going to be able to get a draw. okay? Unless it's a rook pawn. Rook pawns are different, which we will talk about later, okay? So rook pawns are different. They are notoriously bad for knights, okay? So just keep that in the back of your mind. Otherwise, it should be a draw as long as you can control. So in this position, it's white to play, and knight to b4 check simply gets the job done, okay? Because you're putting the king in check, and you are controlling the square in front of the pawn. Now, if black tries to go down and support their pawn, you don't really care. You move your king, they push it, you sacrifice, we get a draw. This is the goal. If you have the knight, this is what you're trying to do, right? Just sack it and get the draw. So the only thing black could do to try to put the pressure on you would be to go to c4, attacking you. They're hoping to just take your knight and then get the queen, right? You jump in front. So you can see that the knight is controlling the square in front of the pawn. You jump in front, they attack you. What do? Check. So you jump kind of back behind the pawn, but you keep the king in check. You know, you could make a big blunder here if you went somewhere like knight a1. Now your knight is trapped and you lose, okay? So don't do that. But you just jump to the other side with a check. Again, if they go here, it's the same situation. They can't ever push. You just move your king. If they ever push, you just sack it, right? So what are they going to have to do? Well, they have to come back. Guess what? You jump in front and you keep repeating this, do this little dance over and over again until you repeat the position and it's a draw. Or they get tired and they're like, yeah, I'm tired of this. And they just let you sacrifice. That's it. Super simple, right? Now, same position, except this time I'm giving black the move, okay? Now, black's not going to push the pawn because this is an obvious fork and you just take it and you get a draw, okay? But what black could do is play king c4 now. And notice what they're doing. They're stopping your knight from coming in on those squares. So I have a question for you guys. Is this position still a draw? Yes or no? The answer is yes. It is still a draw. And all you have to do is keep checking the king. This time, since you can't go here or here, you check this way. And now black has to make a decision. If they move this way, you jump into b3. Look at this. You get in front of the pawn. This is exactly what you want. And you can keep doing this little dance that we've already seen. Okay? So they're not going to want to run that way. If they run this way, same thing. You jump in. Okay? So this is what they have to stop. So the only move that really causes you any problems would be king to b4, where they attack you. And they also take away the squares from the knight jumping forward, right? But what do? Well, you check them again. And now they have another tough decision. If they go up to support the pawn, guess what? You jump in, and we've seen this before. This is the same situation. We do this dance over and over again. Okay, so where do they need to go instead? Well, if they go king c4, this is the exact same position that we just looked at. You just go back to a5, you've just repeated, okay? So they have to go king c5 to try to change it up, but you just go back. And if they try to push, you're in time to get in front of the pawn. We've seen this before. You do your little dance. You keep jumping around from side to side, and it's a draw. And there's actually no other tricks that they have. And so this is basically what would happen. Check. And eventually they're going to get tired of this and push the pawn, and you get a draw. Okay? That's it. So, to recap. If your knight has a way to get in front of the pawn, even if you have to be a little tricky with some checks on the side like this, right? Eventually, you're going to be just fine. It's a draw. Okay? Now, let's talk about the rook pawn. Okay? Because the rook pawn is different. Now, I'm going to give you two situations. This position where it is white's turn, and this position where it is black's turn. Okay? So this one, it's white's turn. And the game is a draw. And it goes like this. Knight to b5, threatening to take the pawn. Of course, if they let you do that, you're happy. You take it and it's draw. They say, no, I don't think so. They push. You come in. You're threatening to take it again. There's nothing they can do. They have to move their king. You take it. It's a draw. Super simple, right? All right, let's go. Same position, except now I've given it black to move. This time, black wins if they play a2. If they play a2. Because what happens is you have no way to catch the pawn now. You can try, but they just move. And how are you going to stop this? You can't. Going back, knight to b5 doesn't change anything. Then they go king to b2, stopping your king from coming in, for your knight from coming in. And again, they get the queen. Okay? So that's how black wins. If they would have made a mistake, let's say they move their king, well, now they give you the option to fork them right away, and you sack. Or if they would have went to here, they give you the option to go knight b5, which attacks the pawn, and then they walk into the fork. And so that's the only way they win if they push the pawn. Okay, but you could see these a pawns are very annoying. And let me actually explain why this is the case. It's because normally, so they go here, you put them in check. They move their king to c1. Normally, you would be able to jump your knight on the other side of the pawn to stop it from becoming a queen, right? Like you can't go this way, but you go the other side. Except you can't. There is no other side. This is the edge of the board. So you can't stop the pawn. That is why these rook pawns are so annoying for the knight, okay? Because you run out of board, right? So that's the takeaway. Be careful with the rook pawns. A lot of times they're going to be wins for the pawn because of this example right here. Now, in this position, it's actually white to play and win the game. And I wanted to show you this. This is probably never going to happen in your game, but it's kind of one of those fun ones. If you somehow happen to have your opponent's king cut off, stuck behind their pawn, they're basically trapped, you can win if you know this technique. White to play and win. All right, if you had a chance to look at that, it's knight to b4. You take away all the squares from the king, okay? All the squares from the king are controlled, which means they have to push their pawn, and now they've smothered themselves. You can deliver the checkmate, which is really beautiful. So I hope that you enjoyed that. I thought it was fun. I would just show it to you, but realistically, this is probably not going to happen in a real game. Now, what will happen in a real game is this. So let me back up here. This is a game that I actually showed on the channel previously, so maybe you've seen it, but I was playing as white. I'm trying to get a draw, okay? And my plan to get a draw was this. When they push the pawn, I'm going to fork the pieces. I'm going to sacrifice my knight, and this is a forced draw. Okay, it's because the bishop cannot control the corner square. So all I was going to do is run my king to the corner and say thank you very much. It's a draw. I don't even care if you take my pawn. Doesn't matter. And this might be surprising, but trust me, it's a draw. I'll just show you. There's no way for black to force me to leave. This is the best kind of situation that they can get. And I just move here. And if they push, I go back and we're going to get a stalemate. Okay. If they don't push and they try to use the bishop, well, I'm just going to go in the corner. And again, there's no moves for black. If you move here, this is a stalemate. I can't move. You have no way to force me off of the corner. So because of that, it's always going to be a draw. So going back to the position, that was my plan. Take the pawn, get a draw. Easy, super easy, right? But I'm like, wait a second. This is a fork. This is a fork. I take the bishop. The question is, and I went for it, by the way. The question is, can I catch this pawn? Because if I can catch the pawn, I'm going to win the game now because I'm going to take this and get a queen. And I thought, surely my knight can stop a pawn. I mean, look at this. It's got 1, 2, 3. It's got 4 moves. Surely. What do you guys think? Can my knight stop the pawn? All those of you who've seen the video, you know the answer is no. I can't. And it's amazing, actually, because black, I don't know if they got lucky or if their intuition just was correct on this or if they calculated. They only had a couple seconds when they made this move, but they played the only winning move, king to d5. If you play any other move, which I thought this one looked more logical, to be honest with you, king c4, king d4. If you play one of these moves, guess what? Now, look at this. We have the same endgame situation that we just talked about. If you try to push, I fork you. If you do something else, I'm just going to take it. It's just a draw. Well, it's not a draw. It's a win for me. It's I'm able to sacrifice, but because these pawns would be a win for me. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, but by going king to d5, when I capture, look at this c6 square. This c6 square is controlled by black's king, which means now I have no way to catch the pawn. I have to go the long way around, and it's too slow. Look at this. It's too slow. I can't get there. But I saw that, and again, I was like, well, let me try to go this way instead in the game. Sorry. Let me try to go this way. But the same thing. He pushes. I have no way to get there. I went check. He moves the king. I have no way to get in front of it. Okay, remember, if the knight can control in front of the pawn, it's going to be a draw. But I could never achieve that in this position. Just couldn't do it. And he ended up just getting the queen and winning. So I thought that was really interesting because this is an actual game, right? And these endgame techniques that you're learning do happen in real games, and it's important that you understand and know them. And so, going back to this position, if my opponent had studied this endgame, which seems like they probably did, and they knew that, like, okay, if I can keep the knight from getting in front of the pawn, that's how I'm going to win. The knight's going to be here. It's probably going to try to come to c6. I should move my king to d5. You could see how that endgame knowledge helps them here to win the game. All right. Hope that makes sense. Let's move on. All right, so the last situation we're going to cover in this video is a rook and a king against a king and a pawn. Now, these situations are usually draws if the person with the pawn can force you to sacrifice your rook. Otherwise, the rook will win if you can somehow manage to capture the pawn before they can force you to sacrifice your rook. Okay, so this is a typical example of a draw. And here's what the draw looks like. You push your pawn, the rook or the king tries to come over, the king's too far, you just kind of move up the board together. This is important, we're going to come back to this. Together, the king and the pawn must stay together. Black can do some random checks, it doesn't really matter. Eventually, they're going to have to sacrifice, otherwise you're going to get the queen, right? And then we get a draw. That's the typical way that the game would end in a draw, okay? However, there are some interesting situations that you need to be aware of. Here is the first one. So here's the situation, almost a similar position that we just saw. White has the pawn, the king, they push the pawn. It's a huge blunder, but the question for you guys is, why is this move such a huge blunder? All right, well, the answer has to do with the fact that they did not keep their king and pawn together, which remember I said was important. The fact that they didn't keep them together allows you to play the amazing move, rook to b4. And what you're doing is permanently separating the king from the pawn. There is no way that this king can ever get next to that pawn again unless you let it, right? Unless you let it by moving your rook. There's no way. What does that mean? Well, it means your plan now is very simple. Move your king over here. Yes. Get in front of the pawn, and it's going to be an easy win because then you're going to easily capture their pawn. So white is like, well, I don't want to allow that. I can't. I mean, even if you walk all the way over here to the rook, that doesn't do anything. The rook just comes back and takes your pawn. I can't do anything with my king. I guess I have to push my pawn. Only thing to do, right? Black says, yeah, sure, go ahead. I'm going to start moving my king. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Nelson, this is a really long plan. Pawn is only a couple squares away. What are you talking about, right? Here's the secret. Once it gets here, now the rook says, oh yeah, I'll go back here, stop it, and I'm coming over to take it. And your king is too far away. Thank you very much. That's the trick. And there's no way around that for white. There's no way around that. The only way, well, that's not true. The only way around it was going back to the original position, not pushing your pawn. Okay, you have to keep them together. All right, so I repeat, keep the king next to the pawn. As long as you go here, it's a draw. There's no fancy tricks where the rook can cut you off because they're together, right? This is not the same situation. Now you can push, and now you might say, wait a second, he did cut you off, but the pawn is far enough advanced that he can't do the same trick as before, right? For example, if you try to come back here, it doesn't work anymore. My king is close enough. Okay, so that's the difference. All right, so that's trick number one. Look for these opportunities to cut off the king. And then the other situation that we'll finish off with is this. Let me actually go back a few moves. So here's the situation. Black's pawn is coming down the board. If your king is close enough to the queening square and it's not boxed out by your opponent's king, you can easily win. So notice the kings are on opposite sides of the pawn. This is good for you because your king can make a beeline here. If your king was, let's just say, over here, and you're trying to sneak there, you're not going to be able to because black's king's in the way, right? So, but in this position, it's fine. They push, you just go forward, and you get that control of the queening square, and then bam, you just take it. And there's nothing black can do. If they don't push, you're just going to take their pawn, and this is a win, right? And that's it. So as long as your king gets control of the queening square, you can win. That's it, guys. Those are the situations that I wanted to cover. That was part 3. We'll be going into part number 4 next time, where they get a little bit more complicated. We're going to keep working our way up. I hope you're enjoying something. Let me know. And, oh, by the way, one quick announcement. The thumbnails have changed. You probably noticed that. The red border was causing problems because people couldn't tell if they'd watched the video or not. And so I had to redesign it. So that's what's going on there. I do apologize for that. Having said that, I'll see you next time. As always, stay sharp, play smart, take care.